Why, hello everyone! Wave the Swallow here, and today I will be reading you all Chapter 12 of The Walking Dead Hope, the Walking Dead fanfiction written by Goofy Gomez, and is apparently a love story between Louis and Clementine. Goofy Gomez, thank you very, very much for giving us permission to read your story. Now, this story is apparently, well, I already said that it's a love story, but this is involving with a married life between Louis and Clementine. And as much as I really don't mind love stories every now and then, I thought, I might as well give this chapter a read, 'cause why not? Well, without wasting any more time, ladies and gentlemen, let's get reading. How did I get here? Clementine sat against the back wall of her cell, looking at the barred window. Her hands had been bound after her third attempt at punching a guard, tight zip ties digging into her skin. Whenever she moved so much as an inch, a spider crawled its way through the wall toward the window, spotted just before reaching the metal bars. In a swift motion, it slithered through the bars and into the house. Clementine scoffed. "Lucky," she muttered, looking down at her hands. "Oh, the spider part, between you and me, I'm glad Shadow's not here. I'm glad Shadow's not here to read this." But anyway, dirt was starting to gather under her fingernails. She thought about the man who'd been coming into her cell these past 3 days. John Myers was a rough man, she decided. He was definitely ex-military. The only question he seemed to ask her was, "Where are you from?" So far, she'd given him the cold shoulder, but her meals were getting scarcer and scarcer as the days went by. Today's rations had been a quarter of an apple and a half a glass of water. They're getting desperate, she thought. Before she could have delved any further into her thoughts, she heard the creaking of the metal door ahead, and a new man entered. He was tall, with short stubble covering the bottom half of his face. He wore a white lab coat over a blue button-up shirt. Clementine straightened up at the sight of him, raising an eyebrow. "You're new," she drawled in a bored tone. "Good observation," the man replied with a smile, taking a seat at one of the chairs. He wrote something onto a clipboard he had in his hands, his eyes never leaving the paper. Clem noticed the top of the scar protruding from his shirt. New frontier. She braced herself for the usual question, already rolling her eyes. "How old are you?" the man asked, instead making Clem do a double take. She blinked a couple of times before he repeated his question. "I'm 21, she said hesitantly. There was no reason to lie about that, was there? He wrote something down on a clipboard, noting to himself, "My colleagues have reported that you've been throwing up. Is that true?" What does that have to do with anything?" she snapped, rolling her eyes again. "I thought you guys only cared about where I live, which I'm still not telling you." "That's okay, I'm not here for that," he assured her, smiling gently. "I notice you also refuse the fruit we've been giving you." "Again, considering the source, that's pretty obvious," she retorted. The man seemed to have found the answer he'd been looking for, because he looked down at the clipboard with a chuckle. "What's so funny? That's not the only reason you've been rejecting the food, is it?" Clementine stared at the man, pursing her lips. She had a bad feeling about him. He had a nice personality, but years on the road had taught her never to trust people like that. He was actually right, unfortunately. This baby was not too fond of fruits, and she was having a hard time keeping them down. She decided to stay quiet, which the man took as a positive answer. For a second he looked uncomfortable. Clementine raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" she prompted, sitting up straight. "Are you sexually active?" he asked, his voice getting lower. Clem frowned, staring at the man. "What?" she exclaimed. Well, I need to know that," he said matter-of-factly. "See, you're showing signs of early pregnancy," he explained, seemingly reading it off his clipboard. "Am I?" she asked, her hands on her stomach. What was he trying to accomplish? Just want to be sure, he said calmly, setting the clipboard on the chair beside him. Wouldn't want to be treating a pregnant woman with violence now, would we? I have a feeling Myers wouldn't care either way, Clem retorted, squinting. She raised her arm and showed the man a cut on her forearm. Dry blood stuck to her skin, some of it staining her sleeve. I'm terribly sorry about that, dear, the man said, shaking his head. John can be a bit overzealous sometimes. Crazy is a better word for it, but okay. Perhaps, he conceded with a small grin, but he's the reason we have all survived this long. Clem frowned, looking down at her bound hands. If he's so great, why did he feel the need to take me? At the question, the man raised an eyebrow at Clementine, eyeing her up and down. Without a word, he stood up and walked towards the door. Before he stepped down, he dug into his lab coat and placed a small box on a nearby chair. I would ask you to take this test, please, he said over his shoulder. Without another word, he closed the door behind him, leaving Clementine in a dim light of morning. Clem eyed a box from her spot on the other side of the room, pursing her lips. What would it matter to them if she was pregnant? What could they gain? She rubbed her belly gently, a habit she'd picked up after being trapped for 4 days. You'll be fine, little one, she whispered. I promise we're getting out of here. She thought of her boys back home. Louis would probably be fuming, searching for a way to get to her. AJ was the one she was most worried about. She was the only mother he'd known in his entire life, and this would be the second time they were apart for the extended period of time. She remembered how reckless she'd been 8 years ago, when she thought AJ was dead. I hope he'd know better. She hoped he'd know better. Looking out the window into the bright blue sky, she sighed, I hope you guys are okay. You okay, man? Javier asked Louis after an hour of silence from the freckled man. Honestly, no, he replied, looking down at his hands. Lizzie was sitting in the back again, keeping to herself. Louis had made it a point to stay as far away from her as possible the night before. What do you mean? Javi inquired, raising an eyebrow. Aren't you glad we now know where Clem is? Only be okay when we actually find her, Louis said, looking up at the sky. The sun was beginning to come out from the east, a light yellow hue coloring the morning sky. Maggie had allowed them to stay the night to rest for the trip ahead, though Louis hadn't done anything but resting. After his statement, they resorted to silence for the rest of the ride to Richmond. They passed a few walkers on the road, most of them lazily droning their way to the sound of the engine. When they arrived, Javi waved his arms at the guard, who let the leader in. He parked the car in the lot with the rest, and Louis made his way to his room. Walking in, he expected to hear AJ's laughter or Clem's soothing voice. Instead, he was greeted with the empty room. It almost seemed like it was mocking him, he thought. By this point, AJ would already be with Erickson with Violet and the rest. He wasn't as worried about him. He wondered what Azim and the rest of the school would make of their precarious situation. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his eyes furiously. He thought drifted to Lizzie's kiss back on that mission. What was she thinking? Had he unknowingly been leading her on? He debated with himself whether or not he should tell Clem. Of course you should, dummy, he told himself. After all, he told Clementine everything. He lay back on the mattress. The springs creaked under his weight, releasing a small cloud of dust from beneath the bed. He took deep breaths, telling himself that Clementine was the stronger person he knew, and that she'd be able to hold out for him. He had to find her. He had to. Due to his lack of rest the night before, sleep quickly overtook him. He dreamt of Clementine and the time they'd taken the day off to go to that lake near the school. After what it felt like barely 2 minutes, he was shaken awake by none other than Lizzie herself. She stood over his bed with a plain expression. At some point, she changed from the blood-covered tank top into a more comfortably baggy jersey. Her face softened when he yawned and stretched his arms, looking around groggily. "How long did I sleep?" he asked. The thought was of wasting more time than necessary weighing in his mind. He noticed the sunlight seeping through the window on his right. At least it was still the same day. "Around 5 hours," she said, glancing at her watch. "Javi said to come get you for the briefing. He wants to discuss the plans with you." He looked up at her, noticing just now that she wouldn't meet his gaze. Muttering a thank you, he got up and brushed past her. The recent encounter was still too fresh in his mind, and the last thing he wanted was to be near her longer than he had to. He rushed to Javier's office, where he and his nephew were already examining the map. They looked over at him, and Javi nodded. And this is where I will stop for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of Wave the Swallow reads Chapter 12 of The Walking Dead Hope.